You've been walking around carrying a version of yourself that the world handed you, not the one your soul remembers. And deep down you know that. You can feel it every time you're alone. That strange, empty tension in your chest. That quiet sense that you're playing a role, even when no one's watching. Because for years you've been building yourself based on survival. Not truth, not peace, just survival. You became who you had to be accepted, to not disappoint, to be good enough. And in doing that, you buried your real self so deep you started believing it was gone. But it's not gone, it's just quiet. It's waiting for you beneath all the layers of fear, shame, expectations, and pretending. You're not here to keep performing. You're here to return, to dig through all the noise, and finally remember who you were before the world told you who you're supposed to be. So stay with this, because by the end of this video, you're not just going to understand why you feel stuck. You're going to feel it lift. You weren't born with self-doubt. You weren't born with a critical voice in your head. That was all given to you through small moments, through silence when you needed love, through pressure when you needed understanding. And over time, those moments started shaping you, not into who you are, but into who you believed you had to be in order to feel safe. And what's wild is, you adapted so well, you started thinking that adaptation was you. You made jokes when you were hurting. You nodded when you wanted to scream. You succeeded when you were falling apart. And all of that got praised. So you kept doing it, kept performing, kept burying your truth for approval that never really filled you. But here's the thing most people never tell you. The real you doesn't disappear just because you've been hiding it. It waits. It waits through the breakdowns, through the quiet moments when your mask slips, through the questions you can't explain, like, why does this still not feel like me? Or, why am I exhausted even when everything looks fine? It's because your energy is being spent keeping a false self alive. And the deeper part of you, the real you, is suffocating under the weight of all the pretending. That's why life feels heavier than it should. Not because you're weak, but because you've been carrying everyone else's version of you. You ever notice how quiet it gets when you stop performing? How strange it feels to not have an answer ready, to not smile just to make things easier. That silence is uncomfortable for a reason, because in that silence, there's no script, no expectation, no role to play, just you, the part of you you've been avoiding. And that's terrifying for people who've never been allowed to be themselves. Because when you strip away the achievements, the image, even the spiritual growth you try to chase like another accomplishment, you're left with someone you barely know. And here's the truth. Most people never meet that version of themselves. They live entire lives from the outside in, building resumes, not identities, perfecting routines, not presence. They don't trust their instincts because they've been trained to value opinions over intuition. But the moment you slow down, really slow down, you'll feel something underneath the noise. A quiet pulse, a sense that there's more to you than what's been handed down. That maybe, just maybe, you're not here to live up to anything. You're here to return to something, not some perfect version, not some enlightened image, but the original blueprint, the you before the fear, before the conditioning, before life told you who you had to be just to belong. And that version of you, it's still alive. It's not broken, it's just buried, waiting for you to stop digging trenches for everyone else and finally uncover yourself. The hardest part about uncovering the real you is realizing how much of your current life is built around who you're not, the friendships that only exist because you agreed to shrink, the daily habits that numb instead of nourish, the goals that look shiny only because everyone else was chasing them. None of that is rooted in truth. It's rooted in survival. And survival teaches you to be whoever you need to be, to stay safe, accepted, and seen, but not known. There's a difference between being noticed and being understood. And for most of your life, you've settled for attention because authenticity felt like a threat. So here's what most people miss. The real you isn't buried under failure. It's buried under performance. Smiles you didn't mean, agreements you never believed in, moments where your soul whispered no, but your voice said yes to keep the peace. And that peace, it was never peace. It was just quiet pain. Pain that looks polite. Pain that gets applause. Pain that helps you blend in until you no longer recognize the sound of your own thoughts. But when you begin to wake up, really wake up, you start to notice the moments that don't feel right anymore. You feel the weight of conversations where you're pretending. You sense the hollowness in your achievements. And that awareness is the beginning of freedom. It's uncomfortable at first. You'll grieve versions of you that were never real, but felt safe. You'll start saying no without needing to explain. You'll stop laughing just because everyone else is. And that silence, that true silence, starts to feel less like loneliness and more like coming home. But here's the strange thing about truth. When you start living it, even in small doses, everything that isn't real begins to fall apart. You'll notice people pulling away. You'll see the systems around you try to push you back into your old shape, not because they're evil, but because the version of you they knew was easier to manage, more predictable, less honest. And that's what makes this journey so heavy. Not just the work of finding yourself, but the emotional weight of everything you have to leave behind. You might lose people who only knew how to love your mask. You might walk away from places that only valued your silence. You might let go of habits that once made the pain feel distant, but also made you feel distant. And in those quiet moments, you'll be tempted to go back, to play the role, to dim the light, to say, it's not that serious when your soul is screaming that it is. But every time you choose not to, every time you sit in that discomfort and don't abandon yourself again, you create space. Space for something honest. Space for relationships that meet you where you are, not where you perform. Space for ideas, creativity, and purpose that come from alignment, not approval. That's the freedom you've been chasing. Not some fantasy of perfection, but the ability to finally exist without permission. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to unbecome everything you're not. And here's where most people get stuck. Not at the beginning, but right after they start making real progress. See, the moment you start reconnecting with who you really are, you'll also start noticing how foreign that truth feels in your current life. Your routine, your relationships, even the way you speak. They were all built around the old version of you. So the more aligned you become on the inside, the more misaligned everything else begins to feel. And this creates tension. Not the loud kind, but a quiet, uncomfortable pressure. Like wearing clothes that almost fit, but never quite do. You'll question everything. You'll wonder, was this really growth? Or did I just break everything that was working? But the truth is, it wasn't working. It was just familiar. And comfort is not the same as peace. So in this awkward in-between, you'll need to resist the urge to fill the gap too quickly. Don't rush to replace the old with the new. Let the silence teach you. Let the space shape you. Because it's in that space dash, that unfamiliar pause between what you were and what you're becoming, where something sacred happens. Your instincts sharpen, your energy shifts, and you start responding to life from a place of clarity, not fear. It's not about adding more. It's about learning to move with less noise, less pretending, less proving. That's how the real you begins to surface, not by force, but by finally having room to breathe. But here's something most people don't expect on this path. When the real you begins to surface, it doesn't always feel like a breakthrough. Sometimes it feels like loss, like confusion, like loneliness, because what you're really losing is all the false identities you spent years building. You stop laughing at things you used to fake laugh at. You stop forcing conversations that no longer feel alive. You find yourself drifting away from the very circles you used to fight so hard to fit into. And it's not because you're better than anyone. It's because your frequency is changing. You're no longer driven by the same validation loops. You don't crave noise the same way. You're not impressed by the same masks. But this is where most people pull back, because the silence gets louder. The isolation feels real, and you start wondering if maybe the mask was safer, easier. But easier doesn't mean true. And this chapter dash, this uncomfortable shedding of what you never really were, is where your freedom actually begins. You're not becoming someone new. You're remembering someone ancient, someone unshakable, someone who existed before the world told you who to be. This part is raw, it's emotional, it's incredibly honest, but it's also beautiful, because the more of the false you that falls away, the more space you create for the real you to breathe. The one who doesn't perform, doesn't seek, doesn't apologize for simply existing. You start walking slower, not because you're lost, but because you're finally done running from yourself. But there's something else that makes this even harder to accept. You'll look around, and people will still call you by your old name, not your literal name, but the identity they once knew. The version of you that used to say yes to everything, the version that kept the peace, even when it meant burning your own truth down. And when you no longer play that role, they'll think something's wrong with you. You're colder now. You've changed. You're distant. You're different. They're right. Because you're finally unlearning the version of yourself that was always pleasing, performing, pretending. But here's where things shift. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself. You don't argue with people's projections anymore. You don't beg to be understood. You just live. You just breathe. And in that stillness, you meet yourself more clearly than ever before. This is when you realize something powerful. Not everyone is supposed to meet the real you, because not everyone was meant to. The real you isn't for mass consumption. It's sacred. It's selective. It's not up for approval. And once you accept this, life gets quieter, but richer. You stop chasing rooms you don't belong in. You stop auditioning for love. You stop sacrificing your peace to maintain someone else's comfort. Instead, you begin choosing yourself in moments where you used to abandon yourself. And that's the beginning of everything real. And then something unexpected happens. You stop trying to become. You stop fixing. You stop chasing. You stop asking the world for permission to be whole, because you realize you were never broken in the first place. What felt like brokenness was actually just disconnection, a disconnection from the real you, from the voice beneath the noise, the knowing beneath the fear, the essence that never left you, even when life tried to bury it under expectations, pressure, and pain. And when you stop performing and start listening, not to the world, but to the quiet current within you, you begin to remember, not with your mind, but with your presence. A remembering that doesn't come from effort, but from letting go. You remember who you were, before the world told you who to be, not some perfect, polished version of yourself, not some healed, enlightened persona, but someone real, messy, honest, present, someone who's allowed to feel it all, without shame, without guilt, without the mask. And once you start living from that place, everything begins to shift. You say no without guilt. You take up space without apologizing. You create without asking for applause. You connect without losing yourself. You rest without feeling lazy. You love without conditions. And finally, you live, not to be seen, but to be. This is not a transformation. It's not self-improvement. It's not even healing in the way we usually think of it. This is a homecoming. The you that was buried is now rising. And you don't need to rush it. You don't need to force it. You just need to stop abandoning yourself, because your freedom has never been somewhere far away. It's been underneath all along, under the noise, under the roles, under the pressure to always be more. The real you has always been there, waiting, quiet, alive, So if you felt this message, if something about it spoke to what you've been carrying quietly, drop the word unburied in the comments. Let it be a small sign that you're ready to return to yourself fully, honestly. Finally, you're not becoming someone new. You're uncovering who you were all along, and now it's time to live like it.